The Special Fathers Network is thrilled to be sponsored by Rubin Law, a multi-generational law firm dedicated exclusively to serving families raising children with special needs.
I just got this wave came over me that just kept saying over and over again, you guys are going to be okay. You will be okay. And of course I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what okay meant. Like, okay, you're going to get through this, it'll be hard. Or you guys are going to be okay, you're going to have 3 car seats someday. I don't know what that meant, but I just had this wave of we are going to be okay. And I don't know how much time later in a separate appointment, I was spending that time in prayer, and I just had this vision of 3 sandy blonde-haired kids playing in the yard.
That's our guest, Phil Irwin, on this 2-part Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Phil is the father of 3 girls, including 2 1.5-year-old twins who were conjoined until just a few months ago when surgeons successfully separated the 2. In this first part, we'll hear how Phil and his wife Alyson discovered that they were going to have twins and that they were conjoined. It's a fascinating story, and it's all on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Here's our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I'd also like to offer my heartfelt thanks to the following donors who supported the 21-CD Ironman campaign, who each contributed $1,000 or more to help keep our programs free to all concerned. In alphabetical order, they are Len Batterson, Ron Boxstaller, Anna and Greg Brown, the Canal Financial Group, Kim Duchessois, Chaz Edelstein, Chris and Christy Kazian, Bob Musikowski, the Peloton Dads Facebook group, Dick Reck, Kevin Richardson, and Tom Wake. Thanks for your generous support.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
And now let's hear part 1 of David Hirsch's conversation with Phil Irwin.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Phil Irwin of Petersburg, Michigan, who's an electrical control technician at NLB Corporation and a father of 3 young girls, including 1.5-year-old twins who were conjoined until they were successfully separated just a few months ago. Phil, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Happy to be here. It should be a pretty fun session.
You and your wife, Alyson, have been married for 7 years and are the proud parents of 3 daughters, Kennedy, who's 4, and 1-year-old twins, Amelia and Sarah Beth, who were co-joined until their successful separation a few months ago. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
I grew up about an hour west of Petersburg. Petersburg is in southwest Michigan in Monroe County. I grew up in Hillsdale County in Pittsburgh, Michigan. It's a very small town that we didn't even have a stoplight. There's the typical party store and a feed mill. Very small school. We were one building, K to 12. I think my graduating class was about 47. I think there was less than 1,000 kids from K to 12. So very small town, rural school. Most kids had a farm background or somebody in their family had an agricultural background of some kind, It seemed like everybody was a farmer or in a machine shop or a manufacturing scenario. Very typical of a small town Michigan setting.
Got it. So did you have siblings when you were growing up?
Yes. My dad and my mom each had one boy before they got married. And then they got married and had myself and my little brother. And then after they divorced, my dad had one more daughter after that.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there's a little bit of his, hers, ours, and his, if I followed the conversation.
Yeah. Yep.
And are you close to your siblings, step-siblings for that matter?
I don't think we're as close as my wife is with her siblings, But we all have kind of the relationship where if we don't speak for a month, it's almost like the old friend that you can always call up and talk to. We don't have to speak every single day to maintain our healthy relationship.
Okay. Well, from what I recall, you have 3 brothers and 1 sister.
Yeah, so I want to say it was 3 years ago. My sister had been in a car accident. We actually used Elizabeth's name to help name Sarah Beth. Elizabeth was young. She spent a few years post high school, kind of typical of her age and the kids in her age, where they just didn't really know what they were doing. She didn't go straight to college. She kind of messed around with this job or that job. She worked at Wendy's for a while, and then when she got pregnant with her fiance, it was like a switch flipped for her, and she saved up enough money to take cosmetology classes, and she was just about to have her license and be able to go in a salon. And she was in a terrible car accident. She passed instantly. The kid that hit her, he was reckless driving, no insurance, no license, tested positive for marijuana, and he was reckless. He was driving 80 or 85 mile an hour in a 35. My sister and her fiance, they had the right of way when they were turning, and there was no pain or suffering for my sister. There was a direct impact, and she passed instantly. So she had a little boy, Cyrus. He is 1 week younger than my daughter Kennedy, who is turning 4 next week. I don't know if that's better or worse for Cyrus, that he didn't get to know his mom very well. But I think a lot of these big life changes for kids, when they happen at a much younger age, it doesn't make the scenario too earth-shattering for them. He's got a very good family unit with his grandparents and his aunt and dad. They do a really good job of taking care of him.
Yeah, well, sorry for your loss. It sounds very tragic. She was, in her early 20s?
Yeah, she hadn't turned 21 yet. She would have been 21 the following February.
Wow. That's pretty heavy. So I'm just relieved to hear that the dad and the son are okay, and that hopefully they can rebuild their lives out of the tragedy that took place that you described. So it sounds like you've had a couple of father influences. You've got a biological father and a stepfather. I'm wondering, how would you characterize your relationship with your father, and then separately with your stepfather, for that matter?
My biological father, he and my mom were married until I was 4 or 5. And the long and short of it is my dad chose a different lifestyle. He needed a lot of input from his parents, even at an adult age. After my mom and dad divorced, after some period of time, he ended up moving back in with my grandparents, his parents. And that typically is when he is the most stable. My dad suffers from alcoholism. It wasn't nearly as bad when I was younger as it is now. I think a lot of what goes on in his life has just grown and grown and grown. For a while he was very functional. Held a job, had a good job. He worked in a foundry. In the 90s, during the manufacturing boom of the 90s, he was making very good money. He was always making very good money, especially when he was living with his parents. He would pay them rent, and they would help make sure he was taking care of himself. Like I said, he chose a different lifestyle, and having the family unit together wasn't necessarily what his inner drive led him to. On the other hand, my stepdad, Steve, he and I are very close. We probably talk on the phone or text every day or every other day. Steve was the type of guy that he he worked in the manufacturing industry. It didn't matter what shift he was on, whether it was first or second or third. When he got home with work, if we wanted to play catch, whether it was football or baseball or play basketball, he could have worked 14 hours that day and not really felt like it. He never really said no. It was quite often you'd see Steve and my little brother Luke and I in the yard playing football or basketball until you had to turn the lights on. You got beamed with a baseball because it was too dark to actually catch it. Everything that my biological dad wasn't present for, my stepdad was. Steve was also very good about respecting boundaries. He would always make sure to never say any ill words about my dad and make sure that he showed my dad respect. Apparently she liked that. She liked that definition.
For our listeners, I wish they could see a picture of what I'm looking at. There's Phil sitting on a couch, very relaxed, super chill, with one girl on one side and one girl on the other side. And they're just sort of like nothing's wrong, right? Everything is just copacetic. So it's beautiful. But I'm sort of curious to know, when is it that you learned that you were having twins? And then was there a lag in the diagnosis that they were conjoined?
No. The same day that we found out we were having twins, we also found out that they were conjoined twins. We had been planning on having our second child, and Alyson told me that we were having twins, that we were having a baby. And then we went through the normal routine. Alyson went in for scans every once in a while. I went to the very first one. We actually weren't going to determine whether we were having a boy or a girl. Alyson was convinced she was having a boy because the pregnancy felt so different than the first one, which was our little girl, Kennedy. And we went into that scan, and I remember the technician had been running late. I think she had a dentist appointment or something like that, so I remember her apologizing because her mouth was numb, so she didn't really want to speak very much. And she waved the wand over Alyson's belly, and she immediately stopped and shut off the monitor and asked who our doctor was. And we told her who our doctor was, and she said, "Okay, I'll be right back." And it took forever. I don't know if it was 5 minutes or 25 minutes, but here we were wondering, what did she see? What was wrong? Alyson had felt the baby. She knew the baby was there and moving, and just weren't sure. And the doctor came in and waved the wand, and she said, "Okay, you're having twins." And I started to get excited, and she goes, "No." She goes, "They're conjoined, they're chest to chest, and their hearts are very, very close." Because I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do for you here. I remember she said that her heart was breaking for us, and then the way she described having conjoined twins spoke to her experience, which was very little, of conjoined twins. Most conjoined twins, I think it's like 1 in 100 to 250,000 live births as a conjoined twin. Most are lost to being a stillborn or a miscarriage early on. Those that do make it to birth will typically only live for about a day. And those that do live longer than a day, it's not very often that conjoined twins can be separated. Every set of conjoined twin is different. Just because I've learned so much about conjoined twins and twins in general in the last year, conjoined twins only happen to identical twins. At some point, when the egg decides to separate to make a twin, as it happens with conjoined twins, the egg doesn't fully separate. And depending on where that separation happens, that's where the girls end up being conjoined. In our case, the girls were conjoined chest to chest from just below the clavicles or the start of the sternum to their shared belly button. And a lot of times when a conjoined twin scenario happens like ours, it's not always known how the heart has been formed. If the heart is also a very complex conjoined heart with extra valves and openings, or if there's two fully separate hearts. So back to the day that we found out about the twins, I remember that doctor she talked to us about, you guys have an unfortunate decision to make. You'll have to think about the life and quality of your children and what you can provide for them, because it will be very hard to give them the proper quality of life. And in my mind, it was a very closed book for her, a closed opinion, no swaying that. The best thing that doctor did for us was to refer us to U of M for a high-risk pregnancy. We went there the very next day and got a scan, and I wasn't sure what we were going to see, how we were going to be treated. I had no idea what we were in for. And the atmosphere there was very, very caring, very endearing, and let's just learn. Let's just learn everything we can before we make any decisions. And boy, we went home from that very first appointment not as devastated as the day before, but boy, it was pretty dark. For the next 7 weeks or so, there was echocardiograms, there was MRIs. I'm sure behind the scenes there was more doctor meetings than I could ever care to imagine knowing about. There was one particular appointment, I think Alyson was 27 or 28 weeks, and we met with Dr. Michaliska, who was the lead surgeon on our case for separating the twins. And I remember so clearly, he came in scrubs, and he said, you'll have to forgive me, I was on vacation for a week, I haven't been fully briefed on the details of your case, but just reading through some of the notes here, I don't know that we'll be able to get to this point, but it doesn't seem out of reality for me to perceive that these kids could be separated. And that was the news we both needed to hear. We went from a very dark and emotional consult to a guy kind of hypothesizing, I think it's possible that these girls could be separated. We have to learn a lot more about them, but it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility. It ended up being a pretty good appointment. And in my memory bank of appointments, good versus bad, that was one of the better ones,
Yeah, well, it sounded like you went from a very uncertain situation, at the local, doctor's visit, learning about the twins and the fact that they're conjoined, to going to a world-class, medical institution like at U of M, teaching hospital, where they've got the best of the best.
Yeah.
And somebody shined a glimmer of hope on the situation, which hopefully helped, part some of the cloudiness. And it sounds like it was a roller coaster of a ride from that point going forward.
It was.
With all the different doctor's visits and, we got to prepare you for this situation. We got to prepare you for that situation. And everything seemed very tenuous. Did it go quickly, or did it just seem like it's taking forever?
A little bit of both. At that point, we were scheduled for weekly appointments. Every Thursday, Alyson had a weekly ultrasound. So I took every Thursday off and went to the hospital. We went to every ultrasound. Looking back, Alyson says I was always positive. At the end of most every consult, the doctors would ask, what is your guys' best case scenario? And I would always say, someday we will have 3 car seats in the car. And they'd always kind of look at me and smile, and Alyson would kind of look at me, and I don't know if she was rolling her eyes physically, but she may have been rolling her eyes in her head. But that was the best case in my mind, is that eventually, someday, we'll have 3 car seats in the car. So like I said, we had weekly appointments where we got to see the girls, not really knowing what was going to happen. if the girls were definitely going to be able to be separated. We brought my mother-in-law one time to an appointment so that she could see the girls. So we started thinking about, like, boy, this is hard for us, but it might be really hard for grandparents. That I felt helpless through this entire thing. You know, a dad's biological instinct role is to protect his family. And there was not one thing I could do to protect us from what was about to happen. You think about that, and then you think about parents' roles. We started including my mom and my mother-in-law so that they would get a chance to meet the girls. And we would take videos of the scans, the ultrasounds, so that Kennedy might be able to see her sisters on the screen one day. We tried to make the best of it.
Well, thanks for sharing. So at what point were the girls born, and how did that transpire?
The week before the girls were born, we came in for Alyson's 33-week scan. The technician saw something. Her reaction, by the way, of seeing something was much better than the first technicians of seeing something. She saw something.
She kept the monitor on. Right, yeah.
Yeah, she left the monitor on. She didn't leave the room. She said, okay, your scan is done. You know, I think Dr. Treadwell is going to be in to see you guys. And we were kind of surprised, but okay, that's great. And Dr. Treadwell came in, and she's very tall, slight woman, and very, very matter of fact. And she just came in and she clapped her hands and said, well, you guys are going to have babies next week. Alyson and I laughed, and we said, no. And she goes, yep, you're going to have babies next week. We think next Tuesday. We're lining up schedules to make sure everybody's schedule will work out. She goes, so go home, take the weekend, and get yourself ready, pack your go bag, and make arrangements, because next Tuesday you're having a baby, or you're having two babies. At that point, I think the Saturday or Sunday before, we had a family dinner where we had our siblings come over, and Pastor came over, and he prayed for our family and what was about to happen. And boy, we just didn't know. I will mention that the week prior, we did have a neonatologist appointment or consult. It's comical now. Towards the end of this consult, the doctor looked at us and said, have you guys talked about pediatricians? Have you talked about car seats? And Alyson and I looked at each other, and we just died laughing. And the doctor looked at us like, are you guys okay? And we said, nobody has talked to us 2 weeks prior to when the girls are born. Nobody had talked to us at that point about the possibility that we might be bringing these girls home. We thought we were going to go to the hospital and have a day or two together with them, or however long we received, and that would be it. Obviously, we're hoping for different than that, and then all of a sudden a medical professional sits down in front of you and says, you guys need to get a pediatrician. Are you kidding? You know, who's going to be a pediatrician to conjoin twins? The girls were born June 11th, 2019. We got up real early. My parents stayed at our house so that they could be with Kennedy. And Alyson was slated for the first C-section of the day. So we had to leave the house by 5 o'clock in the morning and go to the PACU. And we went through all the typical pre-surgery C-section things. And Alyson had her older sister with us as well. So the plan was that once the girls were born and I was able, they were going to take the twins from the operating room right outside to what they called the nest, stabilization and treatment area. And when I look back through pictures, I can see the timestamps. I actually handed my phone to one of the anesthesia techs in the room that were standing behind us and monitoring Alyson and her vitals. And I just said, I don't want to watch, but if you wouldn't mind taking pictures, I would love it. So we have thousands of pictures from that day. And if you look back at the timestamps, you can see 4 feet coming out of Alyson at 11:06. I did the same thing over in the nest. I handed my phone to somebody working nearby, and by 11:15, the girls were stable and on the CPAP breathing machine and just being monitored. So in a period of only 9 minutes that I swear took 2 hours, but it was only 9 minutes.
How big were they when they were born?
They were a combined weight of 9 pounds and 6 or 8 ounces.
So that's a lot of baby. I mean, there's two babies, but
they were big twins for being delivered at 34 weeks in a day. They were very big twins, which was great. Them being that big gave them a lot of extra strength that they needed. So they were on the CPAP. Leading up to surgery, how I was dealing with things, everything was an A or B situation. Let's call A was going to be the more positive situation. The girls are born, they go to the nest, and we get to go to the NICU. Or B, the girls are born, we go to the nest, and they have to go back to the operating room, and the technicians and the doctors leave, and they give us our time with the twins. In my mind, that was the only two scenarios. Now, there's different scenarios off of each A-B situation, but I had to break it down into simplicities, where either we get to go to the NICU, or we get to go back to the operating room to share our time together. It's important for me to mention, like, I say we get to go to the NICU like it was a good thing. For us, it was a very good thing. And we got to go down to the NICU, and boy, is it a different world down there, because there's parents down in the NICU that are suffering and hurting. And here I am smiling like an idiot. It didn't take me very long to realize the somber tone of where we were. But for us, it was a victory. So we celebrate these small victories, but we become aware of where we're celebrating our victories. It might be really, really hard for somebody walking down the hallway to see very happy parents in the NICU when their kids are a CDH kid, or have a heart abnormality, or just got out of like a surgery or something. Like I said, it became very important for me to know when and where to celebrate these little small victories.
That's a point well taken.
I was going to say it's a world that, fortunately, a lot of people don't have to experience. And I'll say the same thing about the PICU. It's after this is a big fast forward, but after the girls were separated, our room became like a little party celebrity room. Like, the surgeons would come in and check on the girls, but the nurses made mention of, boy, your surgeons come in every day. We might not see them that often in other cases. All these people kept coming in, and it was nothing but smiles following the separation surgery. And if you look out in the hallway, and it is a different world out in the hallway, where there's parents grieving and suffering and kids hurting. So for our story, it's very positive. It's great to celebrate your victories, but it's also great to realize where you're celebrating and how somebody else who might be hurting might see your victory during that time.
Yeah, well, it's amazing that you could have the awareness, right, as opposed to just being totally focused on your own situation, to be able to almost take a step back and put your situation into context, right, of what's going on around you. And I don't have a lot of experience, but we did have a little experience when our second child was born. She was a part of a set of twins. The one didn't make it. She was a preemie, about 8 weeks premature, 3 pounds, 9 ounces when she was born. And, she looked like a science fair project for the first couple weeks of her life. And, there's a lot of uncertainty. That was my experience. And you realize that there's some babies born today that are just a pound or two.
Yeah.
And they're just hanging on to life.
Yeah.
Right? They might have been born at 20-something weeks. And that you could have that awareness is pretty amazing. And I don't want to go back too much, but you skipped over the 15 months from the birth of the children to the NICU. And I was wondering, because you were prepared and knew about this, that first 24 hours is critical, right? Are they going to make it?
Yeah.
a third of the babies, conjoined twins that are born, which is less than half, that make it to a birth, die, within the first 24 hours. So was there that sense of relief? We're not just at 24 hours, but, we've got a little bit longer runway here. Things are looking up, and maybe it's not going to be as bad as, it might have been otherwise.
For me, going through all of this, I always felt like if we made it past the first 24 hours, we were going to make it no matter what. Spirituality, our religion, has helped us through this a lot. Me especially. I know it helped my wife too, but I can't speak for her internal experience. I remember very vividly in 2 separate appointments. If they were longer appointments, it was a dark room. I spent a lot of those times, staring at the monitor, but in prayer. And there was one particular appointment where I just got this wave came over me that just kept saying over and over again, "You guys are going to be okay. You will be okay." And of course, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what okay meant. Like, okay, you're going to get through this. It'll be hard. Or you guys are going to be okay. You're going to have 3 car seats someday. I don't know what that meant, but I just had this wave of we are going to be okay. And I don't know how much time later in a separate appointment, I was spending that time in prayer, and I just had this vision of 3 sandy blonde-haired kids playing in the yard.
And that concludes the first part of David Hirsch's interview with Phil Irwin. Listen back next week for the second and final installment of this interview, in which Phil's daughters are successfully separated from one another. That's all on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stcenturydads.org. That's 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. The Dad to Dad podcast was produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks again to Reuben Law for supporting the Dad to Dad podcast. Call Reuben Law at 847-279-7999 and mention the Special Fathers Network for a free consultation. 847-279-7999.